Our presenter today is Phill Butler. Phill is an author and internationally acknowledged expert in partnerships and strategic alliances. Phill has led the way in developing missional partnerships among Christian organizations in more than 70 countries for about 4 decades. He is the founder and current senior strategic advisor of Vision Synergy and was the previous founder and director of InterDev and InterChristo. And now let's turn this over to Phill Butler. Phill, we want to welcome you.
Oh, thank you so much, Daniel. It's great to be here. It's also great to be with friends. I mean, that list of participants is quite eclectic, and it's a wonderful thing to see the manifestation of God's people, the church, alive and well around the world. I know we have some European friends on the webinar today. We have friends in the East Coast and the US, and quite a wide range of both geographical interests and ministry interests. So it's great to be with friends. I would say that for some of you who know me, this is a song I've been singing for a long time. People joke about the fact that I really only have one song to sing. I sing a little different tempo, maybe a different key, maybe it's just a different verse, but it's always the same song. Now, the main thing I want to say about kingdom collaboration is that it's a spiritual exercise, it's not a business strategy. Now, God's truth is God's truth. That's why non-Christians can put people on the moon and can bring them back, because truth is truth. Celestial mechanics and theoretical physics work whether you're a Christian or not a Christian. But this is really a spiritual exercise, and it's made very clear to us in Scripture. Psalm 133, which says that God's people will be blessed, and that there will be very special effectiveness, impact on effectiveness, the release of the power of the Holy Spirit, where God's people dwell in unity. And then, of course, the famous passage is in John 17, where Jesus says that his own credibility, that is, Jesus' credibility, is tied up with how much we work together. So this is a spiritual exercise. Now, one cautionary note here. Anytime we start talking about something that's at the center of God's will, the center of God's nature, anything about the credibility of Jesus, we should count on the fact that we have stepped onto a battlefield where there's going to be hand-to-hand combat with darkness. Never forget that in this special spiritual exercise, as Dan has pointed out by starting in prayer, that prayer is the heartbeat of everything that makes all of this possible. So it's a spiritual exercise, and empowering prayer is critical. Here are a couple of quotes. Martin Luther once said, "Prayer is not overcoming God's reluctance, but rather laying hold of his willingness." Now, God is willing. He wants to help us do these things. And then famous quote from S.D. Gordon, one should never initiate anything that you cannot saturate with prayer, because if it's a kingdom enterprise, it's a spiritual enterprise. What are the keys to success in effective networks? That's what we want to talk about today. Practical stuff that will help you be effective in your networks. When we're finished here, I hope you take away one or two or three key ideas that tomorrow or next week you'll begin working on and say, boy, we could do that differently. That would really help us do what we need to do. The first is that effective networks or partnerships, collaborative efforts, kingdom focused, never, ever function without leadership. Now, it's true, of course, of all great ideas, but it's particularly true with initiatives like collaborative initiatives. Now, that leadership may be a group of people, but typically it's a person. It's a person, it's leadership, but it's a compelling vision. We'll come back to vision a bit later, talk about that. Without vision, people perish, of course, and it's the great challenge. Yes, I want to get to the top of Mount Everest. I will do whatever it takes. Roger Bannister, I want to run a 4-minute mile. I don't care what it takes. It's a compelling vision, provides high motivation. There's got to be an effective process. You don't get to the top of Everest. You don't run a 4-minute mile without an effective process of preparation and execution. So there's got to be a process that gets you from A to B, from where you are to what you want to achieve in terms of your goals. One of the real challenges we'll talk about later in today's webinar is this issue of once we have friends that join us in the network or the partnership, how well are they engaged? Are we doing all the work, or are they highly engaged in participating in this process? Um, to what extent is there consistent communication? Think about your marriage. Think about your family. Think about the ministry in which you work or the business in which you worked in the past or your community. The heartbeat of all human relationships uh, is communication. Remember Genesis 2 and 3, we have a talking God. Francis Schaeffer said, he is there and he is not silent. So we have to be consistent in our communication. What about committed leadership? Let's talk about that for a minute. Uh, Great leadership, motivational leadership, uh, sustainable leadership is driven by vision. It's what you want to do and how you want to do it. What is your dream? Do you have a dream? If you don't have a dream, you probably should not be trying to lead a network or a partnership, and certainly not be trying to get other people involved, because uh, that's the core of everything. That's the core of everything. Committed leadership has got to have vision. And you see those conductors' hands there, the orchestra. Um, for quite some time, my wife and I were involved with a local symphony orchestra, not playing. We supported the orchestra a bit, and the conductor became a friend. And I remember how he used to talk to us about his vision for a certain symphony or his vision for a certain piece of orchestral work. Do you have a vision for what you want to see in the way of outcomes? And maybe it's child issues, children's issues, children at risk. Maybe it's human trafficking. Maybe it's creation care. Maybe it's unreached people in a particular area. Maybe it's translation of God's word. What is the vision? Uh, are we committed not only in this vision, which drives us on our head and our heart, are we committed to the common good? Is this your thing, or is this a God thing? Partnerships, networks, effective kingdom collaboration are born out of a vision for the common good. How about trust? Woody Allen says that half of life is just showing up. Well, I say that half of trust is showing up day after day after day after day. And Jesus, never talks about success. He talks about faithfulness. And in faithfulness, faithfulness means you can count on people. And when you can count on people, they are trustworthy. Can people trust you? Now, your credibility and trust go hand in hand. People could read about you in a book and they think, well, this guy is famous, therefore he must be credible. You may get what's called implied credibility. That is, you walk into a room and people know you by your reputation. Or you may earn your credibility because you show up every day and you keep your word and you do what you say you're going to do. You can't function in effective leadership without credibility. There are always two roles in networks and partnerships. Think about this. I know we don't like to play so often that kind of prophetic role, but you really do have to hold out the vision. You're holding out the vision of an alternative future. Think of Moses. Moses is holding out a vision of an alternative future. Jesus was holding out a vision of an alternative future for the people that he worked with. Eye hath not seen, ear hath not heard, it hasn't even entered your mind what God is preparing for those who love him. So you're a prophet. You have to be prophet. You're not just a servicer. You don't just service, but you do have to be servant. And what does that mean? Well, you have to listen, have your ear to the ground, What's going on with your partners in your partnership or your members in your network? What problems are they having? How can you help them? Can you help them meet their needs? That's critical. So vital that we're sensitive to the people who are around us. Uh, Profit, keep holding out the vision, and two roles. And here is this kind of summarized thing right here. Leader of the team, well, focus on the big vision, but that's not all there is. There's a leadership team, and there are the four constituencies. Who are the four constituencies? Well, the people you're trying to reach, the people in the partnership, the people that are the administrative people behind those in the partnership, who give them the permission, the budget, and then finally the people who are praying for you. Then there are working groups and limited achievable objectives. So the leader has got to be looking at this whole thing all the time. You're the one that wakes up every morning thinking about everything. Uh, we're going to talk about this issue, excuse me, of limited achievable objectives. How do you break down the vision and all that sort of thing in just a minute. We want to pose a poll for you, a question for you. And here is the poll, very simple. As you think about your partnership or your network or your collaborative effort, how clear and compelling would you rate your network or partnership's vision? Just take the 60 seconds there, just click the box, strong, moderate, weak. Never thought about it. Going to give you about 60 seconds there. How clear and compelling would you rate your network's partnership and vision? Got two people that said it is strong. Got 10 who said it's moderate. It's understandable and motivational. One who's maybe honest and said, I'm not really sure. Anyone else? Okay. Well, let's talk a bit then about what's involved in terms of actually doing this whole issue of putting in place a compelling vision. First of all, let me just say that, you know the old Chinese proverb? All great journeys begin with a single step. The truth is that unless you have this long-term compelling vision, it's not going to be worth talking about. But the problem is if it's too complex and I can't figure out what I'm supposed to do today in order to achieve that vision, it's going to be very demotivating. So the point is we do the possible today to realize the impossible tomorrow. So here are some of the pieces, compelling vision. Four essential qualities that I believe exist. Is it a God thing? Now, is this, this vision you're talking about? Maybe you're in a city in Canada somewhere, and your churches in your city have decided you want to come together and you want to serve the schools. You want to be a witness to, and you want to serve the schools. Well, you just ask yourself, does God want the schools to be more effective? Does God want his presence in the schools? Yes or no? Well, you may say this is not rocket science. It's obvious, right? But this is always the first test. Is this a God thing or is it your private agenda? I don't know how many times I'm trying to convince people to consider a partnership or a network. And I had to go back 2 or 3 times because they were absolutely convinced it was just my idea, my private agenda. I just hadn't yet quite told them how I wanted them to join me to do my work. They couldn't believe I was really committed to the common vision. Is it a God thing? Is it too big and too complex to do alone? Look, if you can do it by yourself, go ahead and do it. You don't need 5 other agencies or 150 other agencies. You don't need a network. If you can do it by yourself, do it by yourself. And that's okay. And that's biblical. That's just fine. But the reason we need networks, and part of a critical vision for networks and partnerships, is it's too big. It's too complicated to do alone. The issue with your participants, that is the members of your partnership or your network, the question they have to ask is, does this align with, and does it add value to my ministry? See, if this is the network is the big picture, and I've got 10 agencies in my network, every one of those agencies has got to be able to honestly say, you know what, if I'd spend a day working on this, if I take up a position as a working committee chairperson, which is going to take time, it really will have long-term impact on our ministry in these areas. Bing, 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 bing. Because if nothing else, you got to report to your boss, and you got to tell them why. Why are you involved? Um, Critical to that, of course, and we're coming to the next thing here about vision: specific, measurable, understandable goals. That's part of that do today, what you can do, the possible stuff, in order to do the impossible, which may be weeks, months, or years ahead. I always want to just a little footnote before we move on here, say that please, you see my hands here, sort of praying to you. uh, Always, always, always focus on what first rather than how. Why do I say that? Over the years, 40 years, I've seen so many times good people, good ideas, good vision. Start out by trying to write a theological statement, get 10, 15 people in the room or whatever, because their constituency, if somebody's scared to death, they're going to get into some kind of project with non-evangelicals or something. They want to write a theological statement everybody can agree on. Or they want to write a constitution. They want to write bylaws. How are we going to organize ourselves? And of course, the point is, you don't even know what you're going to do yet. Always, always, always focused on what first and then how. And the how part should always be just enough to allow you to do what. I'll just mention in passing, I can think of 2 or 3 really major partnership initiatives where the initiative had budgets between, say, 600,000 US and a million US, and there was not even a letter of agreement between the parties. By consensus, they developed a mechanism where different parties in the partnership play different administrative and financial reporting roles, and it worked beautifully. Big vision, complex vision, excellent execution, minimal structure. Here's what happens when you have vision that goes sideways. Big vision, big plan, limited outcomes, got a few things done, but that produces declining vision, declining hope, and really it deadens the motivation. Limited achievable objectives help this way. Big vision, limited achievable objectives allow you to have fulfilling outcomes, which in turn produces rising hope and expanded vision. Now, that means the limited achievable objectives obviously have to be focused on your long-term purpose. What is it going to take us to get from A to B? What has to be done first, then second, then third? And with timetables, people responsible, and reporting, measurement tools. How are we going to measure this? And then, of course, communications. As you go through this process, we've got to be able to report back to people. So, a vision. That is that's the whole story. They're limited achievable objectives. That, of course, then brings you to how do you actually organize and run a network. I don't know, for those of you who are on the webinar, where you are in the process, but some of you have been at it for a long time. Some of you are real professionals in this field. You should be teaching the webinar. Some of you are just getting started. Some of you may be dreaming about developing. But what we found over the years is that this is a process. We now smile at each other because for years and years we've said the quickest way to effectively kill a good partnership is to call a meeting. I know the first thing we naturally think of is, well, let's get in touch with this person, that person, that person, get them at the table, talk to them, and see if they want to work together on this project. The challenge is in that we don't know enough about where these people are in their minds, their hearts, their hopes, and their dreams. So I place a great deal of stock in huge investment in exploration. We don't have the time to go into a great deal of detail here, except to say that by the time you actually get people into the room, if you're actually trying to form a collaborative effort, a network or a partnership for any kind of a project, whether it's a city in Canada where you're trying to get people, churches to work together to service schools, whether you're trying to deal with an unreached people group, whether you're trying to deal with human trafficking, you're trying to address refugee, the complex, unbelievable circumstances, say in the greater Middle East. When you finally get into the room with whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 different people or agencies, if you are the facilitator or the facilitation team, you better know everybody in the room and you better know what their attitude is, what their background is. You better know where the skeletons are in the closets. You better know what their expectations are and what they're looking for and not wanting to see. In other words, you as a facilitator need to know everybody in the room and you need to know the primary circumstances that bring them into the room. Now, there's this whole chapter in my book on exploration, very detailed, and on the Synergy Commons website. There are wonderful resources there with case histories, and there are videos, there are stories of people who've done this kind of stuff. But I really, really want to encourage you, you need to get to know the problem. What is the problem? By the time you get to the actual formation question, do we want to work together? You should be maybe not a technical expert in the field. Take, for example, human trafficking. Human trafficking is extremely complex. Uh, Pick a region of the world, human trafficking. Uh, there are, if you go on the international human trafficking websites where there are people dealing with human trafficking in a positive way, trying to resolve issues, you'll find that there are typically six or eight core issues that repeat again and again and again around the world. Okay, that's just one field, human trafficking. If I was trying to develop a group of 25 churches to address and serve schools in Canada, I would need to know what are the 4, 5, 6, 8 primary questions that the schools are facing. I need to know. I don't need to be a technical expert in those fields, but I better know what the problems are. So it's very, very important that when you get into that, just to that, past that exploration stage, and you're now kind of ready to set down the room, excuse me, that you know what you're talking about. That brings credibility. That adds enormous stature and value to your leadership. It doesn't mean you have all the answers, but you know what the key issues are, and that's absolutely vital. Once you have got an agreement that yes, there appear to be out of all these challenges, um, there appear to be some things we really could do together. There really are some things that we could probably do better together than if we keep on working separately. Then you set those limited, achievable objectives for the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it may be, and you're off and running into the operational stage. So it is a process, and please go on the website, Synergy Commons, look up some of these articles, take a look at the videos, get the book. There's a whole chapter on each of these segments there. Here's kind of the way the exploration stage goes. I go out and get information. I do initial interviews. I expand the number of people. I remember one partnership which we did. I went into a country where there was not one single national church in this particular language group. But there were national churches in the country from other tribal and other language groups. So we went in and first said to those churches, who do you know in this other group that's actually working with this other group where there is no church? And they gave us 4 or 5 names. Well, if you take that as the whole picture, you're going to be in trouble. So we went out and talked to all 4 or 5 of those people. And in that case, in that particular country, it meant getting a little Land Rover and driving 25, 100 kilometers across dusty roads to talk to these people. Well, by the time we talked to the initial 5 or 6 people, we had another 4 or 5 names. By the time we talked to those 4 or 5 names, we actually had 12 or 13. So by the time we actually got to the first meeting, we had done all these additional interviews. We had come to some initial conclusions, and we were then ready to actually have a formation meeting. Now, the extraordinary thing about that meeting, and I would say this is pretty true in almost any case, I would say that if you're thinking about churches serving schools in Canada, or you're talking about human trafficking in the Philippines, if you got 6, 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 agencies or churches or people who say they're interested in the topic and they genuinely mean it, if you had done your due diligence with these people, got them in the room, then you're going to find that they really don't know each other and they don't really know all the issues. Okay, next is another chance for some feedback here. Here's the question. I want to get your input. Uh, Overall, think about your people in your network or in your partnership. Are they involved? Are they engaged? Uh, what's the level of member engagement in your network? Very low, low, moderate, high, very high. Just click the box and you can see right there on the screen where we're going with this. Because engagement really, really is critical. How are we doing here? We got 2 that think their engagement is pretty low. Got 5, I think it's moderate. 2 high. Boy, there's a winner. Someone with very high engagement. Good for you. Whoa. Um, Gold star. Anyone going, gone. I'd love to see in 6 months, those of you who said high or very high, um, I'd actually moderate to very high. I'd like to see those numbers go way, way up. Okay, because we're going to talk now for a few minutes about engagement. I don't care how compelling the vision is, how brilliant your leadership, how large the numbers are on your roster. The real issue is, are your members or your participants in your network and or your partnership, are they actually engaged in doing something? Because we're going to come to that in a moment. High member engagement equals network health, member satisfaction, and high value outcomes. If you do not have high member engagement, the network is not healthy. Your members will not be satisfied, and you will not produce the kind of high value outcomes that you want. What are the elements in high engagement? First of all, compelling vision. Now that compelling vision has got to, for me as a participant, if I'm a member of your network, it's got to have very high relevance to what I do. What's the point of being involved? I'm already overworked, understaffed, under-budgeted. Why should I be involved? So the purpose of my engagement is relevance to my organization's own vision. So high engagement, first of all, is driven by the vision and the clear relevance to my organization and what it's called by God to do. Now, that then leads, we were talked earlier about how vision can be big and abstract, big plan, nebulous outcomes, and high disappointment. What we're looking for is big vision, practical outcomes, high engagement that produces satisfaction, and that brings about rising hope and the ability to take on other stuff. That is driven by the limited achievable objectives. That in turn gives you, as the leadership, the ability to give your participants or your members actual on ramps for their action. See, if you say in the next 90 days, we need to get a website up, or in the next 90 days, first thing we need to do is to do this kind of research. In the next 90 days, we need to start an electronic newsletter so we can communicate with each other. Every one of those three things are possible on ramps in which members of your network can take part. They could head up a working group on a website. They could head up a working group on a newsletter. They could head up a working group, a communications team. Excuse me. So these limited achievable objectives give you wonderful opportunity for on ramps. A third thing is really critical is transparency. I don't know how many hundreds, I mean literally hundreds, it's not exaggeration. Excuse me, hundreds of partnerships and networks where people in the network don't know how the network runs. That may seem really stupid. How did the leaders get elected to be leaders? How did the steering team or facilitation team get to be on the facilitation team? Who sets the priorities here? How are decisions made? It's really, 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 really important that everybody in the network or partnership knows how you operate and why you operate that way. And that makes very clear what role they can play. That'll come up again when I talk about when we bring people on into our networks, the onboarding process. So it's very clear to them how you operate and why you operate that way. Communications is critical, and I'm going to talk in a moment about types of communication. But as I said, in marriages, families, ministries, businesses, communication is the heartbeat. Here's one of my favorites. Don't just suppose that you know. Don't just think, oh, yeah, I think everybody's happy. I am a really, really, really strong believer in every single year sending out like SurveyMonkey or something like that, a simple survey. And if you have any questions about this, we've got a lot of ideas and examples of how to do this. Simple questionnaires where you find out what your members think. Find out what value added they think they're getting from being in the network. Find out to what extent they have actually been in touch with other members of the network. Find out to what extent the network has helped them do what they came in the network to do in the first place. In other words, what do they think about the network? And that becomes a really important tool for you and your leadership team to use. You do that kind of survey. It can be very simple. It's so inexpensive to do. But then you and your team need to take time to sit down and talk and pray and say, now, what is this really saying to us? We think we're making good progress, but look at this. Look at this. So high engagement. Those are some of the key elements. Consistent communication. I mentioned that is the heartbeat of communication. I think you got to have a communication plan, a communication team, clearly aligned. This communication is clearly aligned to the vision. And you got to be aware of these different constituencies. Remember, all credible communication, effective communication is not always good news. I really, as an old ex-journalist, I get really suspicious about people who do nothing but dish up optimistic good stories. It doesn't always work that way. So you set an objective by month X, Y, or Z. We want to have this, this, and this happen. Excuse me. And by the time we get to our target date, we have hit 70%. My experience is all over the world in all kinds of projects. If you say to the people in the partnership, last year when we set our objectives, we said we wanted to be at this certain place. Now, by God's grace, there's been good progress made, but we're only at 70%. Uh, we have found again and again and again and again, people will say, well, that's amazing. Truth is, I didn't think we'd ever get that far. So honesty and communication is really, really critical. These core constituencies, I want to mention them again. There are four of them. The people you're trying to serve. In the case of the Canadian schools, it's the kids and the teachers in the schools. Those are constituency number one. What do they think of your partnership when your 25 churches come together? Number two, the people who are in the partnership, the pastors, the ordinary folks in those churches who are doing mentoring or after school programs or whatever it is they're doing in the name of Christ. They're the second group. The third is behind them somewhere, there's senior pastors, there are deacons and other people who are making this possible, who are saying, yeah, okay, I think as a church we should be involved in this. In other words, they have to hear reports. So they approve that we continue to get involved, or they encourage more involvement. And last but not least, they're the people in those churches who are praying and people who are funding and who can't actually go to the schools and do those kinds of things. So there's four different constituencies. That means we need to be in our communication plan thinking about those four different constituencies and how we're going to communicate with them. So have a plan, have a committed team, have that clearly aligned with your vision, and remember those constituencies. In terms of content, well, I think there's always active news. If there isn't anything going on, you got a problem. If there are things going on, you need to be somebody who's calling people, staying in touch with people, emailing people. We need people, a news beat, a kind of journalist, collecting stories from within our partnerships. Share active news. Provide feedback loop. What do you think? Have stories come in from your partner, the members, to your network, from your network or your partnership. Always, always, always. For example, if you have a monthly or quarterly e-newsletter that you send out to people, or you have a website for your network or your partnership, always, always, always put that vision and mission, that compelling vision, right at the front end. Yes, it's like the North Star. It's like when you're navigating. This reminds everybody, here's what we're about, here's what we're doing. And it provides a point of reference for stories that are in your communication and so forth. And of course, the natural seedbed for these kind of communications are those LAOs. Again, if we pick say initial, I remember that I mentioned that one partnership where there was not a single nationally led church in this particular language group, but there were other churches in other language groups, and finally got 13 or 14 ministries together. It took 18 months and 3 visits to the country and a lot of miles and Land Rovers to get those people in the same room. And by the time we had spent a day counted, a whole day listening to those 13 or 14 ministries say who they are, who they were, and what they did. These are good people. Many have been there for a long time. They're not crazies. They're godly people working hard, many times in isolation, distant places. They were stunned to hear what other people were doing and what their background was. Some were Pentecostal and they thought, well, those guys are wild Pentecostals, or those guys over there are probably Anglicans. So, what do they know about Jesus and the saving blood of Christ, Then you actually hear these people talk. And you're so powerfully moved. Say, my goodness, had no idea. And then you find out what these people are doing. And that's the shocking thing. Because everybody thinks they know what's going on. What's the classic line? It's not what I know. It's what I don't know that I don't know that always gets me in trouble. And so often in early stages of partnerships, it's helping people learn about what's going on. And through that, then we can identify key critical points of potential action, and these limited achievable objectives come out. And I'll tell you from that particular meeting, because there was such a clear, obvious duplication of effort in printed materials in that language group in that country, the group spontaneously said, one of the very first things we have to do is we have to set up a communication or media production coordination working group so we all know what each other are doing. Very specific project, very specific date, very specific people in charge, and so forth. So the message, active news, feedback loops from your people. For example, you do your annual survey of your people, the alignment survey that I talked about, report that. Better to be honest. The more you're candid with your people, the transparency is great. Medium, well, you know, the media, emails, web, newsletter. I'm a strong believer in a monthly call. You know, call in costs nothing. But for you to have the ability to offer to your participants a call in on a monthly basis, here are highlights. What questions do you have? Great developments that you're engaged in. What do you need help on? Presents great opportunity for camaraderie and strengthening of the partnership. And then, of course, website. Well, here it is. This is the bottom line picture, friends. Um, what can we do together that we can't do alone? You know, as we're working as kingdom people, committed to Lord Jesus Christ, and seeing people around the world come to know Him, whether it's in our local neighborhood, whether it's their schools in Canada, by lifting up the Lord there, whether it's an unreached people group, whether it's such challenging things as drugs or human trafficking or creation care, evangelism among the most distant and difficult people groups or resistant groups, wherever it is, we're always going to be able to do better if we work together. Um, don't be intimidated with a shark. And I mean symbolically the shark. But together, by God's grace, you can do great things. God's people, trusting God, holding hands, and working together can see the impossible dream come true. Daniel, over to you.
Well, thank you, Phill. What we want to do now is go ahead and transition into a look at some of our questions here. We have a number of great questions. I'd also like to invite all of our attendees today to go ahead and add any additional questions that might be prompted as Phill answers some of the questions that are there. Likewise, go ahead and add some that have you've been kind of thinking about and pondering as he's been speaking. Phill, our first question here is from Mike. He says, I'm responsible for dozens of these kinds of partnerships and catalyzing the multiplication of them. What kind of advice would you give to someone in my role, and specifically around how he uses his time and how he's able to be more effective in while he's facilitating multiple organizations?
Well, Mike, the thing that occurs to me is that, um, first of all, you're the you're the one person around which all the rest of these people rotate. You're the person I have in common. Uh, the second thing in common here is that there is a vision for collaboration. Apparently, uh, you've been blessed. You know, you got the blessing to take on this job and responsibility. With that, the authority to do this kind of stuff. I would say probably one of the most valuable things you might want to think about doing is getting a council, like a monthly call-in, the leaders of these different partnerships. I think it's very difficult for you to juggle all the needs of all these different, I don't know if you're talking about two or three or 20 or 30, but I don't care what it is. I think you'd be a lot better off if you had say, a monthly forum, internet-based, call in Skype or some other, GoToMeeting or something like that, where you can talk to these people. Simple agenda, maybe once a month in an hour or something like that. Give that a shot. See if that won't help.
Terrific. Our next question comes from Dave. Are there common thresholds that would help us know some project is big enough or complex enough to call for collaboration rather than attempting it on one's own?
Well, yeah, I think that, how long is a piece of string? Back 20 years ago, if you were Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, 800-pound gorilla, or you were Campus Crusade, or maybe you even IFES. Some of these Southern Baptists, some of these large international agencies had enormous capacity, and uh, whereas others did not. But even in those cases, I think that the critical thing, and I remember a particularly large initiative that Luis Palau did at one time in 1984 from Wembley Stadium in London, uh, where his team clearly had the ability to originate an event. They were good at doing events, but he wanted to get involved in sharing this with the rest of the world. They had no experience in doing that, so he knew he had to get involved. So eventually we got involved. We facilitated. We got the BBC involved. We got 16 stations around the world involved. In other words, what's the vision? And if it requires other people to be involved, then I think you need a partnership.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Another question from Mike. Do you encourage all of these types of collaborative partnerships to have an end date?
They can, absolutely. I mean, if you've got objectives that are very well defined, I've been working on a project. I think, I'm supposed to do something in my own hometown. Talking about partnership all over the world, but I don't do any partnership work in my own hometown. So I've been working on a project here uh, where people have been trying to put together a community plaza to commemorate veterans. That's a big deal. It's small town. It gets to be controversial. Everybody has their own view on this. Uh, but and I've been working on a particular aspect with a team of 4 other people. It's kind of a partnership to do that part that we're doing. But we set very specific dates. Right? This is our deadline. These are our dates. We've got to do this. So yeah, I think it's very healthy at times, either for the overall partnership or certainly limited to certain objectives within your partnership must have dates. Have dates and metrics, numbers, because if you don't have that, you have no basis for performance evaluation.
Thank you. Another question here. These kinds of partnerships take time. So how can I or others be more effective in catalyzing or multiplying them with my limited time? You've mentioned a council. Any other ideas?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the thing that in the past, the only thing that I found is a very helpful question. It's a very practical one. I think that I tried to group collaborative issues together as much as possible. In other words, if it's a geographical thing, or there are 2 or 3 initiatives bubbling up in a certain geographical area, then I would try to get those people together or to work on those as a focus point for a while. But maybe a particular kind of sector. Somebody's coming, they're wanting help in cities. I think we've got people like Sam Estes on this call and others who, every day they wake up, they've got 10, 15 cities on their mind. But you can't deal with all of that all the time. So I think you have to organize by time, by geography, by topic, and sometimes, getting things together by topically. That has been a really valuable way to spread the influence of a network. For example, one region in which I worked for quite a long time, over the years, it developed about 6 or 8 partnerships around specific language groups. But people like Wycliffe and SIL and the radio broadcasters
Mhm.
desperately needed a platform or a place they could meet to talk about translation and the actual content in those languages. So we set up a working group that, in a sense, cut horizontally across all those language groups, whereas the language group partnership was trying to focus on getting everything together for that language group. The language people, translation, broadcasting, film, Jesus film, so forth, needed a place to meet and talk about that particular problem. I think that's another way to probably deal with that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question we have here, is there a way or to graph or gauge the engagement level of all members of a network, or is it subjective? Is there a way we can take a pulse?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I don't have, our team has talked off and on about this, um, but if you're in touch with us, we can give you some samples of these questionnaires. And the questionnaires are usually uh, based on the 4 or 5 key things we think are the absolute essential indicators of a healthy network. Okay, so the point there being that it's not rocket science. You get this questionnaire out, and if you send it out, let's say you had 50 agencies or 50 people in your partnership. If you get 30, 25 to 30 back, that's pretty good. And you may need to actually get some volunteers to call the non-respondents, because the non-respondents in surveys like this are the most critical people of all. Don't ever lull yourself to sleep uh, without trying to work on the non-respondents. But having done that, I can guarantee you, you look at those results just off a straight survey monkey study, you will know what you need to do. It'll be very clear where the work needs to be done.
Mhm. Our next question here. Prophets and their vision are often dismissed. What advice do you have for ensuring your message and vision can be heard effectively?
I'm sorry, Daniel, I missed the first part of the question.
Sure, let me restate it. Prophets and their vision are often dismissed. What advice do you have for ensuring your message and vision can be heard effectively?
Let me tell you a story. This is a really good question. I was in the mountains in Morocco one time, about 2 o'clock in the morning, trying to convince a guy that he ought to come to a partnership meeting. It wasn't my meeting. It was a meeting for the 3 countries of Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco.
Mhm.
I was just trying to hold up the vision, for the thing. It was kind of the prophetic voice. I was the salesman.
Mhm.
That you read the Old Testament, the prophets, they were the salesmen. They were saying, this is what you ought to do. If you don't do it, here are going to be the consequences. Uh, and after drinking tea at 2 o'clock in the morning, this guy was a former Citibank systems engineer. Smart guy, loved the Lord, sacrificing in the small town high in the mountains in Morocco. But he kept giving me all the standard excuses. I don't know, partnership doesn't work, and it's too complex, and blah blah blah. I said, look, let me just ask you a very simple question. Time is short. We've been at discussion now for a long time. Uh, God's work is not the Harvard business case study, but let me ask you a business question. 60 million people in these 3 countries at that time. That's what it was.
Mhm.
Less than 1,000 known believers in these 3 countries at that time. I said, now, do you agree with that? 60 million and roughly 1,000 known believers. Yes or no? Yes, he did. He said, he agreed. I said, what do you think God's idea is of market share in these 3 countries? I said, I understand narrow is the road to salvation, wide is the gate to destruction. I also know that God is not willing any should perish. So what do you think? God's desire for these 3 countries is what? 1% market share? And instantly he responded and said, 1%? Are you kidding me? I said, well, my friend, Do 1% of 60 million. I said, we got a problem. Either Jesus is bogus, there's some cultural thing that 150 years of missionary work here hasn't been able to figure out. There's some kind of terrible satanic stuff going on here, kind of like Star Wars. You don't need to know where to put your hand on the glass shield. We're kidding ourselves. Now, do you think it'd be worth just sitting down one time and asking ourselves if we want to see a breakthrough here? Is there anything we can do better together than if everybody just keeps doing their own shtick?
Mm-hmm.
Finally, the guy capitulates and says, "I'll be there." I think at times you really have to play kind of hardball. You pray, you work, you try to go through the logic path with them, but I think at times you have to be pretty tough. It sounds hard, but
Mm-hmm. Another question here from Mike. What are some effective ways to monetize these kinds of collaborative partnerships so that a facilitator or administrator can receive some compensation for their work?
ah, ah, ah. Well, monetizing the work of collaboration is a real challenge. Um, if you read the Stanford Institute for Social Innovation and the history of their research in the field, you'll notice that in the quote most sophisticated sectors like Rockefeller Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, um, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, it goes on and on and on. It is only the last 4 years, that the big money people have begun to see the inexorable reality that you get more done when you work together. But
Right.
even there, uh, and I very encourage you to look online at the Stanford Institute for Social Innovation articles on collaboration. Great articles, fabulous research. And you read those stories and you'll say, whoa, this is our experience. But my point is that um, and the first challenge is not so much how can I demonstrate the value so I can get paid? That's really a second question.
Mm-hmm.
First question is, how do we demonstrate the value of the partnership or the network and demonstrate the monetary, if you want monetary or monetize, what's the monetary implications of the value of what the partnership is doing?
Mm.
See, if you can't demonstrate that, if you can't build limited achievable objectives with metrics, dates, outcomes, increase in effectiveness, increase in participation, greater, it goes on and on and on, all the options that may be achievable through a partnership. If you can't demo that and demonstrate that there is monetary value to those kind of outcomes, why are they going to pay you?
Mm-hmm.
They're not,
Yeah.
because it's very abstract. It's very abstract. You've got to demonstrate the value, the functional value of the fact that the collaboration, the partnership is really actually achieving something. Then you may say, hey, you think you can cover my costs at least, or a
Right.
contribution? My ministry is willing to put up 50% of my salary. You think the partnership could put up 50% of it? Well, yeah, maybe, look at this, all the stuff we're doing. Yeah, let's find a way to do that. But you can't do that on the front end.
Yeah. Another guest asks, we are in the process of turning our network leadership over to a national leader. It is requiring a new form of accountability that needs a new type of structure. Any recommendations?
Uh, I would say that with non-Western leaders, particularly from the East and from the South, where they're more classically oriented to oral tradition, um, you better set up your evaluation process with your team uh, that it is basically an oral review Uh, you can work with this person, of course, to help set objective, limited objectives, which the partnership itself develops. And I found generally that they're very aware of that and so forth. What really gets, and this gets into the whole issue of shame and honor cultures and so forth. One thing that I found with non-Western leaders who are leading facilitation, playing facilitation roles, it is very, very difficult to use objective data and to call these people to account for their performance based on numerical stuff. What we do need to do is to listen to them, talk to them, and take time. It's going to take more time. You just don't fill out the evaluation sheet. But it, and I would say more than anything else, agree in advance on the basis on which you're going to do the evaluation.
Our last question here. Would you consider that sharing a collaborative vision might involve a form of discipleship?
I would say absolutely. I mean, I remember one of the early partnership meetings in which I was involved. We had Pentecostals, we had anti-Pentecostals. I mean, literally anti-Pentecostals. We had Brits, we had New Zealanders, we had Belgians, we had Australians. There were a couple of Americans there. Most of these people had never met each other. And we basically locked the door for three nights and 3 days and spent those days saying, in this particular region of the world, is there anything we can do better to see a real breakthrough than if we continue to work separately? That was really hard work. Small groups, flip charts on the wall. Start at 9 o'clock in the morning, go until 8 o'clock at night because we were in a Mediterranean country. Can't even get into a restaurant until 9. Excuse me. At the end of 3 nights and 3 days, they'd come up with this long list. And they wanted to say, they said all these things could have to be done, but they can only be done together. And we said to them, I'm sorry, that's a great list. It's a fabulous list of 20 things, but you've never done one thing together. So you got to get it down to 1 or 2 items that can be addressed and dealt with in 6 months. Because we got to know if this works. Mm-hmm. And so I spent 6 more hours. 6 more hours going through this list of 20. Got from pray, vote, pray, discuss, vote, pray, discuss, vote. From 20 down to 17, 17 to 11, 11 to 9. And of course, the farther down the list goes, the harder it gets to make the decision, right? Well, when they finally got to the last thing, they all agreed and literally reached out, held each other's hands, and began again spontaneously to sing praise God from whom all blessings flow. And fell on each other, embracing each other, tears running down their faces. Now, these were people who wondered if these guys were even Christians when they walked in the room. I would say, the work of partnership can be a huge spiritual journey, a great exercise in revelation of the nature and character of God. It can be, yes, absolutely, wonderful discipline and discipleship kind of exercise.
Thank you. I think it's a great question to end on. As we wrap up, Phill, I'm wondering if you would maybe mind just giving a short blessing for all of the collaborators and our guests who are in the midst of collaboration and networks.
Lord, the world is a big, complicated place. And without you, we're lost. We're just flat lost. Thank you so much for your love for us individually. Here we are on this spinning ball in the middle of inky blackness called the cosmos. You hold it. Psalm 19 says the whole cosmos you hold in place. Everything moves according to your will, and yet right down to these friends who are on this call, you know us. You know what's in our heart. You're sustaining what's in our heart. And we do pray for them, give them encouragement, give them vision, give them hope. Pray that there are practical steps that might be taken as a result of this time together, that your name might be glorified, that God's people might work together more effectively, and that the church and your personal credibility, Lord Jesus, will be greater as a result. For it's in your name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.